Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John, and after the music we're going to be continuing with a discussion that I had with Johannes about our own long-running campaigns and long-form campaigns in general, and a few other things that we decided to chat about. So, cue the music. So we pick up this episode with myself and Johannes continuing our discussion, and we're talking about, amongst other things, how we think you could use Burning Wheel to do a more traditional fantasy sort of D&D style game. Yeah, I've got to admit the only way I, if I was going to be running a Burning Wheel game, the only way I could really see it sort of working in like a more sort of standard like D&D mold was if for the first session you were like, just like maybe before the session you were like, here's the starting scenario. You all live in a small village and you're all farmers or whatever around the village. And the very first session, the village is going to be attacked by orcs who are trying to do X, Y, and Z. And then you could come up with your beliefs based on that. And then I think, as I do with OSC anyway, like at the end of each of the sessions, I normally say to you guys, like, right, what's the plan for next session, so I can plan ahead. I think in this case I'd have to say, get it down in a more sort of concrete way for Burning Wheel and say, right, what are you guys planning to do next session? And then maybe between games I could be like, all right, just to remind you guys, next session you're going to be, you said you wanted to travel to the northern fortress to try and get the dwarves help against these orc raiders and maybe try and discover where the raiders are making their lair, and then people could come up with beliefs based on that. That's the only way I could see it working with that sort of like Arthur economy that the game sort of relies on. But again, as you were saying, I still don't think you'd be making the most of the system, if you see what I mean.
No. And you would be making it harder for yourself than you need to at that point. Yeah. But that is an excellent, by the way, an excellent Burning Wheel game that I would delight in running. Everyone make a character that's in this village, and the village is going to be attacked by X, like whatever, like zombies or whatever it is. That would be a brilliant game. I think that would be a lot of fun.
I think it'd be cool as well because if you just said like, create characters who are in this small sort of town/village, you, based on what the players create, you can then sort of use that to intuit more about the village. Because if everyone goes like, we've all just created like two life path like peasant farmers or whatever, you're like, so it's a small like farming village. Whereas if someone's like, actually I'm like a minor noble, you might be like, maybe it's slightly bigger, or maybe there's like a noble family who like rule this village, or like the sort of burgomasters or whatever of the of the town. Or like if someone goes, I'm a town guard, you can be like, all right, well, there's obviously a standing body of soldiers like defending this village. Like, what's happened to them?
Yeah, or if two players, like one player is like, so I was like a itinerant monk and I settled here. Yeah. Okay, well that already tells us something. And then the other player is like, well, I'm the abbot here. So that's already like two players invested in this sort of religious idea, and you're already like the gears are spinning in my head about this game, what this game could be. I could go for something like this. Definitely, because we're also talking about scale in regards to these two different campaigns that we're having here. So the scale, I feel like in the Burning Wheel game, we've been, especially in the last couple of sessions, we've been really going up from we're traveling through the forest, Tolkien style, camping out in the woods. Occasionally coming across these like ancient ruins and poking about a little bit. We've gone from that to so we're now talking to some of these living remnants of the ages past, and now we sort of have a lot more of this like high level cosmological idea of what we might be looking at doing.
Well, I mean, in terms of just like the timescales covered as well. I mean, we've done like the one sort of 10-year time jump in like Smoke and Snow. Yeah. But by and large, it's like, maybe like a week or two passes like per session, depending on what you're doing. Whereas we've sort of done sessions like that in Chronicle of the Crowns. But like I say, last session, there was over a year of game time covered in that session, and we sort of we sort of played out like selected events throughout the year, and then we were like, right, okay, so we're all doing our training and whatnot. We've all like hooked up again at the end of the year. Now we're going to tie up these few last little bits and pieces, ready for potentially the next big push against the undead wannabe king and his like armies. So I personally feel that, like I say, as a player in Burning Wheel and like the person who runs GM's at Smoke and Snow, I feel like which is pretty much what we're going for. I feel like the scale of Chronicle of the Crowns, it's a lot grander in scale. It's a lot more sweeping, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
For some reason, the word operatic came to mind, but that maybe that's a little pretentious. But we did have an actual opera
there was
in the game.
An opera in the game. So. But you know, when I sort of think about Burning Wheel, I think of it like, you know, in the Lord of the Rings films. You know, like occasionally you get like the big like sweep, so like at the very start of it, you get the big sweeping vistas, and you get like the voiceover, and it's like, oh, and the ring betrayed Isildur to his death, and things which should not have been forgotten were lost, and you see just like a montage of all that happening, and it's like, oh, we haven't, even with the extended editions, we haven't got time to like tell you all this like 1,000 years of history in like one film.
So casually cover the Silmarillion.
Yeah, so that like, we're just going to give you like the Clip Notes version of it in a little montage, and then we're going to move on to like the more immediate thing. I feel like we've got that sort of sense of scale in Chronicle of Crowns, mostly not hundreds of years, but we've got that thing where you can be like, oh yeah, like a week's passed, a year's passed, and also that's allowed you to like move events on. Because you're like, oh, a year's passed, like, oh, that undead army that were like far up in the north, they ain't so far away now, they've like moved out a bit.
And knocking on the door now.
Yeah, and things were like Lord Beric, who was like an allied lord. We've been able to like hear things about, you know, like what he's been up to as time's passing, and it's made it feel like the world's sort of like a living place and like stuff's going on. Whereas, not to decry my own game, but with like Smoke and Snow, if you guys, like at the minute, you guys have gone to like a little isolated island, you've been there for like a few weeks, you come back and you'll be like, oh, there's a few bits and pieces that have happened during the week, but it's not going to, just because of the time covered, it's not going to be like, in the case of Chronicle of the Crowns, oh, a year's passed, like great armies have moved and like clashed, and Beric's had to like retreat from the north, but he's like, with like the dying breath of his last gasp, one of the old kings sort of like bequeathed this title to him, and he's now like properly Lord Beric. He's not like a merchant prince, and so it feels like the events are a lot more sort of sweeping, and there's a lot more sort of like going on, which I know we were going for that sort of Tolkien vibe, but it really does sort of bring that to mind for me.
Yeah, and to come back to your Smoke and Snow game, I think the like it's not on the face of it, like there's some differences in the sort of scale of time and the events that happen over the time, but I think there's also a little bit like under the surface similarities between these two things, and I think probably the big difference there is because you had basically in spoilers, I guess, for Smoke and Snow, there was that event where we basically, this is how I conceptualize it anyway, we kind of restored the world to its original state by like taking this piece of the world that had been shunted into like a pocket dimension, and we sort of shunted it back to where it was in the heady days of history.
And just to give a very quick explanation for anyone who's listening who's not seen that, effectively, I wanted an excuse to like use some of like the Dolmen Wood stuff that like, Necrotic Gnome are using, but it didn't really fit into the sort of campaign we've got. Obviously, one of the big advantages of like D&D is it's like there's all different planes and stuff like that, demi-planes and whatever. So to tie it in with the sort of the God Blades, there's one for each alignment. There's the lawful, the chaotic, and the neutral one. And the green blade being the neutral one, they eventually found a portal into this Dolmen Wood, which in our campaign setting was a chunk of the forest where some ancient wizards who became known as the Droon had basically gone, oh, there's an ice age coming, Like, we can't stop the Ice Age. What we're going to do is we're just going to like do this massive magic spell around this big old chunk of forest, and we're going to move it into a demi-plane where it's always summer. And in order to do that, they'd cast this magical working with this green blade, this vastly powerful god blade, as like the linchpin that maintained their enchantment. Obviously, player characters go there. They're like, we want that green blade. They eventually, after many adventures, yoink the sword. And then, obviously, that unravels everything. And effectively, the pocket dimension sort of like reappears or sort of reintegrates with the main world, which gave us an excuse as we were sort of like wrapping up like the first season in inverted commas of the game to basically go like, all right, what bits of the map do we like and that we want to keep? What bits do we maybe want to reorganise a bit, and we can take some of the stuff we liked out of Dolmen Wood, slap it into the main setting, sort of jiggle it around a bit, and it gave us a license to sort of reinvent the setting a little bit and to sort of like move on with that. And it also, because of it being D&D in the way it sort of works, we've not really been able to do time jumps in the same way as you do in Burning Wheel, because there's a nice robust sort of training system in Burning Wheel. So if you're like, if all the players are like, oh yeah, we want to spend like 12 months just like training our asses off to like become the best we can be, you've got a system where you can go, yes, this is how many points you've got, this is how long you've got to train, this is how skilled you are at the end of this 12-month period, and here's what's happened during it. Whereas we don't really sort of have that in D&D by default, so we don't really have such big time jumps. But the way I sort of worked it in the Smoke and Snow campaign was, because it was effectively a different realm, like time was running differently there, which the player characters worked out. So for every day that passed there, I think it was like a month or a few months passed in the normal world. So when they unraveled this and they basically fled back to the portal and escaped with the magical blade, they got back and they were like, oh, 10 years have passed. Like, and it meant that we could go, all right, we can move the setting on. We can have like this big like evil lord who planned to turn himself into a dragon. He's a dragon now, and he's like he's now more of a threat. Oh, this vampire lord up in the north, he's found in some like Transylvanian style like Dominion up in the north, and we could just sort of like move everything on a bit without me basically saying like, oh yeah, I know you guys have potentially spent like 10 years just like training your asses off, but like you're still like level 8 fighters.
Here's your I don't know, new beefier character art.
And because as we know, and we've said like a number of times previously, because let's face it, when you go up, especially if you're a fighter, when you go up in level, you don't really get that much extra stuff in like sort of old school essentials, the retro clone we're using. But so I think just me basically going, oh yeah, you spent 12 months doing that, here's a bajillion XP to like raise you up some levels, wouldn't really have had that much impact, because you'd be like, okay, 10 years have passed, I've got like an extra +2 to my attack, and my saves are a bit better, I've maybe got a few extra hit points. Whereas when we've just had like a year in Burning Wheel, and we're like, oh yeah, I can see that because I've spent all my time training with like this guy, my like skills have gone up in this area, and I've focused on this, and that's how I've improved. It feels like there's more of an impact with that sort of like that training montage and that passage of time in Burning Wheel.
Yeah, and I suppose for Smoke and Snow, like speaking as a player in that campaign, the thing that I get from these a few time jumps that we've done, especially the big one, the 10 years, and the recreation of the world. Speaking of the scale, let's put a pin in that before I forget my current point. So, the thing that I get from the OSC sort of elided time is basically the events that have happened there. As a player, I don't even go into the game. If you would say like, okay, so we're going to jump ahead 6 months, the thing that I would then be immediately interested in is, okay, John, tell me about X, Y, or Z in the game world. Like, how have those things progressed?
Yeah.
And what could I now do as a result of that? So I would be like, my quote unquote, I don't know, like the result or the reward of this time that we've spent would then be to just immediately pick your brain and the setting for the new, fresh, and exciting things that I could engage with. So,
and that was one of the things I enjoyed about the sort of 10-year time jump in Smoke and Snow, because like, if not the first, but like the first couple of things you guys said, once you confirmed, yes, 10 years have passed. The first things that came up is one of you was like, oh, what about that lord who's trying to like become a dragon, like that you found out about when your magic swords that read his mind. You're like, oh, how's that happened? And then we had Rob, who was like, oh, I made that like deal with that hag where I was going to sort of like help her find a student like in a few months, and it's been like 10 years. Like, oh, what's going to go on with that? So I really enjoyed the fact that, like I said, the first couple of things you guys reacted to, as you were just saying there, was like, oh, how have these things that we knew were on a sort of time scale, how have these things changed? Because we were sort of expecting to be here and like sort of witnessing them as they happen, and we're not. We've sort of jumped to the end of them. So what's the new status quo, effectively?
Yeah, and I think that also to sort of contrast to, again, I think for me specifically, because I go into Smoke and Snow looking at this thing that we've collectively painted and which you have provided the foundation for, and now we've messed around in. I look at it and I go, what shall I pick to like, it's a buffet of things for me to engage with and the other players to engage with. And in a sort of inverted way, is that this in Smoke and Snow, it's me going towards events, right?
Yes.
Because I'm going towards, let's say, the Fire Lord, because we sort of determined that guy is really bad news already, like 10 years ago, and now he's even worse news, except weirder this time. So we would be going towards these things, and in Burning Wheel, what we're doing, especially when we do time jumps, it is to have events engage with the characters. Whereas I feel like it's not strictly the opposite, because of course we both run sort of D20 style games where we have these big moving setting elements that, like, by virtue of their own nature, they collide with the players without the players doing anything. They might just be off doing this thing, and suddenly these guys come in and they have a whole thing that you didn't know about as a player, but now they're here and you need to do something about that. Maybe in Burning Wheel, that's sort of the like, when you do a big jump, it is in order to basically get hit by the next thing. Which is what we're doing now. Is we sort of did a lot of laying the groundwork for what would be coming up next, and then at the end of that we did a time jump, and now we have jumped into the bit that came next. And now it's the current thing.
I mean, I think one of the things I like about both your campaign and Burning Wheel in general as a system is everything is based around things getting a bit complicated, basically. So it's like the advancement, it works by you making rolls and there being complications if you're unsuccessful. But you still get to like tick off your progress marker, and eventually you improve your skills by doing stuff, basically. So the system, and as we both said about both of these systems, neither of them's perfect. But far
perfect
from
games don't exist.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel that, like, Burning Wheel, like, really the system sort of front and center says that, right, the game's working if you're constantly sort of like butting against these complications and trying to find ways to overcome them. And I feel you sort of have that in D&D, because obviously whether it's just like going into a dungeon, fighting some monsters, or like finding some treasure or whatever, it's a complication, there's traps, there's stuff going on. But I feel that in the sort of D&D games, particularly like a sort of open world like Hexcrawl, like Smoke and Snow, you're more free to sort of wander around at your leisure. And obviously, like you say, there's setting things with like a timer going on, so you're like, all right, we know if we don't do anything about this, it's going to become a bigger and bigger problem. But you could still choose not to do that, and you can still sort of wander around on your own time scale. Whereas I feel that, like, Burning Wheel really is So like best played when you're like, right, there's this thing we need to deal with right now, this complication. Right, we've dealt with that. Right now, there's these three other things we need to deal with. Like, right, which one are we going to deal with first? Yeah. And it's more sort of about like prioritizing things and immediately like going from one like situation to the next.
Yeah, and the game sort of thrives on you have this thing that you urgently believe that you need to achieve, and you pursue that, and maybe you fail, as is often the case in that game. Maybe you fail. That spawns off another thing that you may want to deal with immediately, and then you just sort of you push on, and you take your licks, and you sort of strive always to go forward, get the thing that you believe that you need to do. And the game is sort of built on that like forward momentum. Like you push on. It doesn't, and it sort of talks about this in the text, which admittedly again is imperfect. It talks about the thing in the game where there's a header in the game, no weasels, and there's some additional language around the fact that like don't worry about quote unquote stupid ideas. You push on, because that's where the drama is, and you cause some complications, you deal with that, and all of that is good fodder for what you're doing in the game. Like more drama and to deal with in the story and
well,
all
that's
that.
it. And I mean, I know we've sort of spoke about this before, and like, obviously we're not talking about like, people just doing like stupid for like the hell of it.
No like jokes. I mean, just like
they're like, I'm going to jump off this cliff, see what happens. Where you're going to die? That's what's going to happen.
Let's see if I can fly. No,
no, you can't.
Yeah, you're dead now.
But putting that to one side, I mean, we've often sort of spoke about it, and I've said numerous times like the only time I feel you sort of lose in inverted commas in RPGs is if you don't do anything. Because if you, especially in a game like Burning Wheel as well, if you try something and you're like, oh, that plan I came up with didn't work, or that crucial roll I was going to make like failed, like it's not like the game stops and grinds to a halt because of that. You might be like, oh, things have got a bit worse. Oh, now we're going to have to like, pull some outs out of the bag. Or you might be like, oh, the undead army have like seen through our defences and they've stomped this town. We're going to have to fall back and defend like a fallback position. But the game still goes on. There's more complications. There's more interesting stuff to do. And obviously, if you win as well, if you win against the undead army, your defense is perfect. Everything goes the way you want it to. You crush them. It's not like, oh, congratulations, you've won the game. That's it. It's over. It's like, right, you've defeated this undead army, but like, where did they come from? Like, what about the guy who originally like raised them? Or there's always like a greater evil or another challenge to face. So win or lose, the game goes on and there's more complications. Whereas again, if you just sort of sit there and you're like, oh, no. Things still happen, but you've now become a spectator. You're not actually involved in them.
Yeah, and a good sort of addendum to that is as well, like death isn't really like it's very easy to get yourself killed in Burning Wheel if that's the kind of game that you're playing. Now you need to calibrate for the kind of thing you're doing in Burning Wheel, as we have, I think, often talked in those sessions as well. Like you use the bits that fit the thing that you're trying to do. For us, we've mostly stuck to, for example, the resolution stuff. We've basically stuck to the core mechanic the entire campaign. There's a couple of very in-depth subsystems for stuff that we could have easily used fighting.
I was going to say, I'm still hoping like when we fight up against the undead to like get a chance to like bust out that fight system and like duel one of like the generals or whatever.
I'm very much. I was talking to John Drury about this as well. We had a little chat the other day, and I was talking to him about the fact that there's probably at least going to be a fight. So the subsystem is called fight in our sort of the next phase of this, when we actually start to actively fight against the these enemies. But what I was going to say is, like, it's a system where if you can pick the things that you need to produce the thing that you want, that's great, because you don't need the rest. And for us as well, I don't like, there's been very few places where outright death would have been the thing that would have happened bad things, very consequential things, things that are very unwelcome to the characters in the game, no doubt.
I don't know, man. I thought I was getting pretty close when I was like frantically defending against that Shadow of Despair and his whole whooping me all around the room.
Yeah. But the thing is there as well, like, as is often the case in other games as well, that like, maybe this is a me thing, and some other people I know feel the same, but like, death in general is often not the most interesting thing you could do. And for me personally, I'm gonna gravitate towards, like, how can we make this, interesting and weird? Not to say that I've like, and then clowns come in and they stop the Dark Lord. Like, no, not that kind of weird. But if you guys lose against this, like, Dark Overlord, we don't, unless we decide the game stops there, we don't need to. Maybe you guys are now like the unwilling participant. Like, you're the vassals now. Like, King Cameron is now a vassal king of this Dark Overlord. And now the game transitions into you guys being like, well, we need to fly this flag for now, but on the down low, we have the resistance. And then it transitioned into, like, you guys trying to undermine this thing while trying to, not get killed.
Well, that's it. I mean, from my own point of view, I mean, obviously, as we know, sort of like the OSR games can be pretty deadly. You know, as we saw last session in Smoke and Snow, you guys were exploring like this 3-level dungeon. You got rumbled by like one of like the acolytes of like the necromancer in this dungeon, who like runs down to the floor below, like, "Oh, master, they've invaded the dungeon," and he's sent. I'm like, "Oh, right, he's got like 14 zombies on like the level below, right? Okay, he's gonna send them up the staircase to like deal with you." And you guys took him down, but you were in like quite a bad way. You've got like one like NPC with like one like shonky like healing potion on him, and he's like, and I'm in that sort of situation where, like, because I know OSR games are lethal, like, I never mind if someone like dies, like, if that happens, that happens. I try and just sort of like play it out as I would think. Like, this acolyte runs down, he's like, "Oh, master, they're invading." He's like, "Oh, well, I could go up and risk myself, but like, I've got all these like zombies like knocking about. Like, I'll just send them up and like see what happens. Worst case scenario, I've lost some zombies. I'll go up and have a look later." And so you guys look like you're all gonna get taken out at one point. And I'm like, "Oh, if that happens, it's unfortunate, but it happens." But I'm always quite glad when it doesn't happen. So like in that scenario where like Dave's like rogues like, "Oh, I'm faster moving than these zombies. I'm gonna lead them a merry dance around the dungeon away from you guys and like gradually snipe at them with my bow and like take them out." And then it's like, "Oh, while I'm doing that, like the NPC guy can like split his healing potion and like at least get you like moving again."
Even drag your bodies away from the site of carnage,
even though you're only on like a couple of hit points. So like, even though I'm like, "Oh, do you know what? If that hadn't have happened and you'd have all died, I'd have been like, it's unfortunate, but it's what happened." But I'm always quite glad when it doesn't happen, because like you said, I think going into the next session, we're in a far more interesting, albeit it's still hazardous position, because you guys are like, "Oh, our two main combat guys, we're pretty much out of it. We've got our backs against this magically locked like gate, which we don't know if we can get through to escape. If we do escape, we're still like far underground in like a hostile like cave structure, and there's probably going to be some more undead coming up soon, and like whoever sent them, this like necromancer's obviously down there. You've not really got any sort of magic users in the party. Obviously we'll hopefully have Rob back next session, so you'll have like someone who's on a bit more full scale, but you still only got like Dave's rogue, who's sort of like doing all right, but he's still quite injured. You and Darren's characters are pretty like, a strong wind could like blow you over, and then you basically have one person on like full strength, really. So it's still not a great position, but it's a more interesting position to start in, rather than me just next session being like, "Oh yeah, you all died next session, let's see what characters are you guys gelling for like this session."
Yeah, I definitely thought we were gone.
Yeah.
Because I know that like Dave's character has a lot of tricks.
Yeah.
But 6 zombies, like if they get within hand's reach now.
Yeah, that was the thing I thought, because I mean, I think he used the terrain quite well, and he sort of like, he was like, "All right, as long as I can stay ahead of them and keep shooting, eventually I'll wear them down," because they always go last in initiative because they're zombies. They're always really slow. They've only got 1 speed. They can't run or anything. So if I can just keep ahead of them, I can just keep whittling them down, and eventually I will take them out. But like you say, if you got into a situation where, I've accidentally backed myself into a corner, now there's a couple in combat with me and I can't just run off, then he'd have probably been in real trouble, because he's not like a frontline fighty character.
No. But to further contrast that as well, because like my second longest campaign that we've done with this sort of sphere of people that we play with, is the Stars Without Number game, which is also, D20 adjacent stuff. We've, like, death is on the line there as well. These games, I think the concept changes my sort of natural tendency to, even though like Burning Wheel is, I'm switching the threads here a lot, but it'll come back. So Burning Wheel has built-in mechanisms to basically reinforce what I just said previously, where like death is like not the thing that will necessarily provide the most interesting stuff, and also you as a player in a Burning Wheel game, you have a lot of opportunities to say, yeah, I might have gotten, tagged real bad by that guy with that giant sword, but I have the will to live. Now, that doesn't mean you get off the hook. No, that means now your next 5 years, you're in the dungeon recovering from your wounds, and the Duke comes by every month, like once, and mocks you across the cell, and we transform the narrative to something else. Now you're wasting away in this dungeon trying to recover from this horrendous wound that you sustained, but you're still alive. But now the game is different. So Burning Wheel does that by design, and I sort of, regardless of the game, I also gravitate towards that kind of idea where you take the consequences, but you don't necessarily stop the game. However, for example, with Stars Without Number, and of course I've played in numerous D20 games that you've run, and death is something that has occurred to me often in those games, and sometimes in the ones that I've run as well. And it's not like that's a lesser experience to me at all. It's just that's that game, and that's the enjoyment in that game. The specific threat of that specific situation, like we were just in with the zombies in your Smoke and Snow game, that was exhilarating. It is always exhilarating to me in your games when I'm the guy supposed to be out there with the shield, and I'm on one hit point. Like I was a lot of the time in the last session, I was on one hit point, and I'm like, well, this is really fun because the stakes are incredibly high here. Yeah, I mean, because it's not just about me, because I know that the next guy is going to be an NPC or a guy with a crossbow and a shirt. Yeah. So it's not just about me as well. I might die, but these guys will die faster than I will.
Okay, so that's it for this episode. We hope you're enjoying our continuing discussion about long-form campaigns, Burning Wheel, and the games that we've got going on at the minute. We're going to continue this in a future episode. If you've got anything you'd like to say to us about these episodes or others that we've done, maybe you'd like to tell us what your favourite long-form campaign is, why you like long-form campaigns, or why you prefer shorter games. Either way, you can get in touch with us a number of different ways. By leaving a voicemail message on SpeakPipe or Anchor, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.